Okay, now let's take a little look at how we created this beautiful floor down here. It's not super complicated, and I've actually shown how to do this before in some of my other classes, but let's go over it here. It's a little bit of advanced modeling and some tips and tricks that I know just from creating a lot of these. Okay, so all this is one object, well, really one element of a 3D poly copied around a bunch of times, but there's a few things that we need to do to make it look really nice. One thing is I added a little bit of extra modeling into there so that I could put a noise modifier on it and add a little wave and variation into there. And then you can see I have a material by element, which makes it so that I can put the different material elements on there, making a random texture going throughout the floor. You can see that I created this in a small panel, and you need that to be big enough so that you don't see this visually, you don't catch the repetition. So you can take this panel and copy it over here and then maybe mirror it so that it repeats even less often. Okay, but you need enough variation and a big enough panel so that you're not going to catch the tiling and the variation. So to create this from scratch, what you would do is take this and say rectangle and create a rectangle. And we want it to be exactly 4 times as long as it is wide, like that. So 2 feet long, well, 6 foot long, 2 foot wide, but really this way, 2 foot long, 6 foot wide. Okay, and that's our rectangle, and then we can put a simple extrude on it, which I have a button for here. You can also find it in the modifier panel here, extrude. And we'll say that we are going to extrude it 0.7 inches. Then we can select these edges around here, and I'm going to put a slight chamfer on them. The easiest way to select them is to select just the face and then hold down Control while you go into edge mode, and it'll select all the adjoining edges. And then we chamfer them. Just a small chamfer just to see those edges. Okay, now we're going to add that extra modeling I was talking about with these lines going across. We can do that by simply selecting these edges and these edges all together and then using a connect command. Connect it 4 times. Actually 3 times to create 4 sections. Okay, so these should all be 6-inch squares now. So we're close to getting our single panel just right, our single board. Now we need to make sure the mapping is right on there. So let's put a UVW map. We want to take off real world here. And we're not going to get into materials yet, but here we have just a basic standard material with a bitmap put in the diffuse slot. Okay, we need to make sure the materials are going to be right. We're basically planning for the future here. So I just took this wood material and I'm cropping it to here by adjusting my crop box to make it the size of one panel basically, and then hitting apply, right? So that's applying that crop. Make sure it's showing in viewport and then put it on that material. So there it is. We have our image is tiled to 1 and 1, and our UVW map is 1 and 1. So it just applies it directly. If you look at the gizmo, there's a perfect outline around this object, putting that image, mapping that image directly onto it. Okay, so that mapping is correct for that object. Now we can convert it to edit poly again. Make sure the mapping is right first and then convert it to edit poly. Now we can simply rotate it 45 degrees. Let's make sure this is getting to exactly 45 degrees. If you're having trouble getting it exact, you can get the angle snap on, right? And then we can copy it. And I want to copy it in sub-object mode, element. And I'll show you why in a minute. Clone to element. We want it to remain as part of the same poly. Now because we divided it into perfect squares, this point and this point should line up exactly, and they do. And it looks like we missed part of our polygon. We did. That's not what we want. We want to make sure we're in element and we get the whole element, not just these faces. Okay, let's try that again. Clone to element. This line and this line should line up perfectly, just like that. And there you have it. Now we just do that over and over. And the more we get, the faster they reproduce. Okay. Now the mapping is going to be the same on all that, but that's good. We want the mapping the same. We're just going to change the material, right? And it's going to be the same size material, so it'll still work. Now we simply want to take this and continue copying around. Look at that, isn't that cool? It rotates all of them at the same time. Make sure you're in pivot point center to do that. So that it takes each of them and rotates them around their own pivots. Get that corner lined up right there. And that is our basic building block. Everything should line up, and it does. Now we can just take this, copy it up, clone to element. So we have our basic panel. We need to move this into place. Make sure everything lines up here. And then let's copy that all one more time. And we'll have a big enough panel that there won't be really any repeat that we notice. So there we go. Now you might need to clean up your edges so that it can repeat for you this way, but no, there we go. So now we can just copy this around. Boom, we got this huge floor, right? That's too big of a panel. We don't need it that big. Okay, now the only other thing we did, or I did to this floor, was one, make a way better material, but we're going to be doing that later. I put a slight noise modifier on it in the Z direction only. Okay, so scale that noise modifier down to, let's say, 0.5. Make it fractal or not. You might need to experiment with this a little bit to see what you want. But then just in the Z modifier only, you can take it up, say 4/32 of an inch. That's probably plenty, right? And that gives you just that waviness in the floor. See, like right there, that edge sticks up a little bit much, right? And that's great. You'll notice that'll be very subtle, but you might notice it if you know it's there. If not, it just adds to the realism. And you can go as high or as low as you want. You can see that floor is getting a little too deformed there now, obviously. But that is just enough to add a little bit of very, very subtle reality to your floor, okay? And then the last thing that we do is add a material by element, which is right here in our modifier stack. Okay, now we make as many material elements as we want, and then we hit random distribution and turn it up to that same number. So if we make 6 different board materials, we put them all in one sub-object material, and we turn this up to random distribution 6. Okay, so over here, let's look at this one. The material, there's 8 different types of boards. They all have the same mapping, but they're different images. So different images mapped in the same way onto these boards. And there's 8 of them. And so it's randomly distributing those 8 different materials throughout these boards. If we were to do that with our material here, our standard material, we would look, well, let's look at the existing one. Okay, there's the 8 different materials. They look terrible in here because my rendering's set to standard right now. And these are Vray materials. But there's the image. Okay, so all I did was basically take this image. Well, I set up one material, right, with that image. And if you look in the reflection, it's cropped in the exact same place, but it's a reflection map now. Well, let's do it so we can see. Okay, so take this, copy, paste it into your specular. Again, it's got the same crop. This, you would change this now to a reflection map instead of the diffuse map, but we'll use it just as is right here. There you go. Then you could do the same with the noise map, or a bump map, sorry. Okay, so there you go. You can change the maps to whatever you want, but you've got your material set up there. And then what you need to do is just turn this into a multi-sub-object material by going here. Keep old material as submaterial. And then just copy this, right? You can actually just drag it like that. And you want to copy it not as an instance, but as a copy. And then what you do is take this one and say, okay, Now let's take this diffuse and slide it up to this area, or this area right there, okay? And then on the third one, and you might adjust your reflection settings a little bit for that one too, you just make these things have slight variations and take in a different part of your wood map, or you can make completely different materials for each one if you wanted to do that too. That is all okay. But in this example, we're just going to do it like this, and we set up, let's see, make sure you set your number to 3 here, so you don't have a bunch of random black materials in there. And then you set this to 3, right? Make sure each one's showing the diffuse map. Okay, the first one looks like that. The second one looks like this. And the third one looks like this. Okay, so the only reason I'm talking about this now, even though it's more materials and we're going to get into that later, but with this one you have to plan ahead. So we mapped that one object and then copied it around so it's all mapped properly already. So now we just apply different diffuse maps to it using this material by element, and voila, we have a very nicely varied floor with different looking planks of wood throughout. Okay, so you're going to need more than 3 different types of materials on there, 3 different diffuse maps. You'll want probably like 8. I'd say 6 minimum, but this one has 8. Okay, so that's how we created the floor. All right, hopefully that's helpful to you. Hopefully you picked up some tips and tricks in there. Let's move on.